Well, let's turn now to the opposition to get their thoughts on this sitting of the House. Andrew Scheer is the Conservative House Leader. Peter Julian is the House Leader for the NDP. Nice to see both of you again. Welcome back.
Thanks very much for having us back.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
Listen, Mr. Scheer, I'll start with you here because I do want to get your reaction to the kind of pushback that we've heard, the pushback that we're getting from Liberals when your leader says that too much is broken and that the responsibility lies with the Prime Minister. How do you react to that?
Well, it's no surprise that after 8 years of Justin Trudeau mismanaging everything from passport offices to airlines and airports to inflation and higher interest rates, that Liberals get a little bit sensitive when you talk about how this Prime Minister is responsible for federal issues. He's the federal Prime Minister, he's responsible for federal issues, and those issues are not going well for the vast majority of Canadians. We're seeing record numbers of Canadians being forced to use food banks. Mortgage payments are more than doubling for the average home in large centres across the country. After 8 years of Justin Trudeau, Canadians are falling further and further behind. They're paying more for their mortgage. Their paychecks are able to buy less and less. And the Liberal message is everything is fine. And how dare those Conservatives remind people about the failures that this government is doing? So my reaction is not really surprised, but our party is going to continue to offer concrete solutions on how we can fix things, how we can fix the mess that Justin Trudeau has created for Canadian families.
Well, let me pick up on that because, you know, people have been saying, okay, it's easy to say something's broken. It's harder to come up with a solution. What kind of solutions will you then be focusing on during this sitting to drive home that point?
Well, we've been focused on making life more affordable for Canadians. The Trudeau Liberals are planning on tripling the carbon tax. That's going to make home heating more expensive. Their inflationary deficits are forcing the Bank of Canada to raise interest rates to tackle the inflation that the government caused in the first place. So our message is going to be focused on dealing with the inflation crisis, on helping Canadians keep their pantries full, and fighting the types of policies that make inflation even worse. In addition to that, we've put forward concrete proposals to deal with the rise in violent crime. After 8 years of Justin Trudeau, our cities are experiencing a surge in violent crime. Look at Toronto with almost daily incidents on the TTC where people are being brutally attacked by repeat and dangerous offenders. Justin Trudeau's policies was to make bail even easier for those types of criminals to get, meaning they're back on the street. We're listening to police chiefs across the country. We're listening to premiers across the country who are demanding bail reform to make our cities more safe. So those are the types of concrete solutions. Stopping the plan to triple the carbon tax, getting those inflationary deficits under control, and making our cities more livable and more safe for Canadian families.
Mr. Julian, I'll get you in here because if those are the Conservative priorities, what will the priorities be for the NDP?
Well, I think the Conservatives have indicated through the provinces what they want to do is privatize health care. And this is something that Mr. Trudeau seems to be implicitly encouraging. What the NDP, what Jagmeet Singh is fighting for in the House of Commons is more support for Canadians. That includes dental care, that according to our confidence in supply agreement that we've pushed the Liberals to put into place dental care for the end of this year, the adoption of the Canada Pharmacare Act, so that we actually start to put in place the provisions for pharmacare for Canadians. We also believe there's a housing crisis. It was bad under the Harper government. It's just as bad under the Trudeau government. The housing prices doubled under Harper and doubling again under Mr. Trudeau. What we actually need is a federal government that steps up to build affordable housing. And the reality is that is something that we are pushing hard for the government to do. The reality is both Conservative and Liberal policies have been very, very similar. And we know of the erosion over $30 billion that goes to offshore tax havens. This is something that started under Mr. Harper, continued under Mr. Trudeau. We simply can't afford to make the ultra-rich the priority of the federal government. What we need to do is make investments to ensure we have a good public health care system, not for profit, because that costs more and gives an inferior level of care. We need to expand for dental care and pharmacare. We need to ensure that there's affordable housing available for Canadians. These are the kinds of decisions that leadership should put into place. And this is certainly what Jagmeet Singh has been advocating for in the House of Commons.
I'm wondering, though, Mr. Julian, what is the measure of acceptable? Because, of course, this is a minority government. It can stay in power because of the deal negotiated with the NDP. So what is the marker of acceptable when it comes to issues like pharmacare, Medicare, dental care?
It's very clear. It's written in the agreement. It's available to the Canadian public. Dental care put into place for seniors, people with disabilities, and youth under 18 by the end of this year. A Pharmacare Act passed in the House of Commons. And you'll recall, just 2 years ago, I presented on behalf of the NDP, the Canada Pharmacare Act. Conservatives and Liberals voted against it because they chose to side with pharmaceutical companies rather than with regular Canadians. And so that has to be passed by the end of this year. So the litmus test is very clear. It's available online to all Canadians.
But what about,
and this is what Jagmeet Singh has negotiated.
And what about Medicare, though? Because I think that is very much top of mind, given that we're basically a week away from the meeting with the premiers. What about Medicare?
Yeah, and that is enforcement of the Canada Health Act to ensure that services are publicly funded and available to all Canadians. And this is something that Conservative premiers and Mr. Trudeau don't seem to understand. When you look at the American system, it costs twice as much per person, and it leaves tens of millions of Americans out. We don't want to see the same thing happen in Canada.
Okay, so a huge ask here. You know, Mr. Scheer, I'll bring you back in here because, of course, against this is the backdrop of the economic picture painted by the Bank of Canada, the economic advice that the Prime Minister and his cabinet is getting, that we are in store for some tough times. How do you hope the government navigates the demands being placed upon it, not only by the NDP, but also by provinces, but also dealing with the economic reality that Canada is facing?
Well, the economic reality is that the Bank of Canada, economists across the country, even former Finance Minister Bill Morneau is now admitting that it's the Liberal spending that's causing inflation in the first place. They're all saying now that by and large inflation is a domestic phenomenon, and they're pointing to all the spending that had nothing to do with the pandemic. You know, we're talking about the $15 billion that went to high-priced consultants, including over $100 million that went to a very Liberal-friendly firm, McKinsey. Dominic Barton, the former boss of that firm, very, very close ties, personal buddies with Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland. They were big winners. They got lots and lots of that spending, big bonuses through the wage subsidy to profitable corporations that gave out bonuses to their executives and board members. That's the type of spending that's causing inflation in the first place. So if we're going to tackle this crisis as parliamentarians, we've got to get a grip on all that spending that's causing the problem in the first place. And when politicians like the NDP and Liberals say that the answer to the inflation that's caused by the spending is to have even more spending, it's a little bit like offering a very thirsty person a glass of seawater. It might look appealing, but when you drink it, it makes the situation worse. And that's exactly what we're going to see with all this new spending that the Liberals at the NDP are demanding the Liberals engage in.
Okay,
these
Mr.
are
Julian,
actually supports.
you have 1 minute here, Mr. Julian.
These are supports that go to regular Canadians, and this shows how disconnected Conservatives and Liberals have been over the past few decades, that they've allowed tens of billions of dollars go to the ultra-rich, to overseas tax havens, oil and gas CEOs, rather than spending the money on seniors and people with disabilities and families right across this country. This is why we need to ensure that the ultra-rich pay what they owe Canadians and that we actually invest that to help Canadians. I haven't heard a single person in my riding say, oh, we don't believe in dental care. They believe it's high time that regular families actually could access dental care. They could actually access pharmacare, because I have constituents that are paying $1,000 a month for heart medication. These are all things that make a difference, and it helps businesses compete as well, because they're not having to pay for medical plans for their employees. So it's win-win-win. This is the kind of thing that actually makes a difference for Canadians. Final point, we've seen with greedflation how grocery store CEOs have inflated prices. And this is something that Conservatives have not said one word about. The greedflation that has forced regular families to have to pay so much more for their groceries.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, out of time, but of course we have a whole sitting to talk through. So for tonight, Andrew Scheer, Peter Julian, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.